Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar with Lauren Hayes. My name is Bradley, and I will be your moderator for this webinar titled Generative AI Considerations for Special Librarians. Before we start, I would like to provide some information about our company and introduce today's presenter. Lucidea is a software developing company specialized in museum and archival collections management solutions, as well as knowledge management and library automation systems. Our brands include Sydney, Presto, Argus, Archivera, Eloquent, and Quadristar. Now, I would like to take a moment to introduce today's presenter, Lauren Hayes. She is an associate professor of instructional technology at the University of Central Missouri. Previously, she worked as an instructional and research librarian at a private college in the Kansas City metro area. Prior to working in higher education, she was employed by the National Archives and Records Administration and worked as an intern at the Harry S. Truman Presidential Library and Museum. Her professional interests include the scholarship of teaching and learning, information literacy, digital literacy, educational technology, and academic development. Take it away, Lauren.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I am excited to be here talking about generative AI. It is certainly something that has taken over a lot of conversations in the last couple of years. And in this session, we are really going to focus on these few things here. We're going to define generative AI, discuss briefly how it works, then look at different ways that it can be used in your own work, then have some conversations about policy considerations, copyright, things you'll want to be cautious about, and what the future might hold. So I hope that you will all find something that piques your interest as we go throughout this presentation and something new that you can take back to those you work with. Let's start by defining generative AI. I'm sure this is a term that you've all heard before, but I think it's helpful just to define our terms so we're all on the exact same page. And so this definition was actually created by ChatGPT, one example of generative AI earlier this year. And ChatGPT gave the definition of generative AI refers to a class of artificial intelligence systems designed to generate new content such as text, images, music, and more by learning from and mimicking existing data. So there are a lot of things to kind of unpack in that definition, which we'll be doing. But I want to just mention, while we're still on this slide, just a few things. I think often when we think of generative AI, we think primarily about text. And that is most often the way that it is currently being used. But there are systems out there that will create images, music, PowerPoint presentations, or just slide decks, all sorts of different types of content. It is not solely focused on text. It even creates videos. The OpenAI, which is the parent company of ChatGPT, recently came out with a generative AI to create videos as well. So the technology is continuing to grow and move into a lot of different areas that are going to just continue to give AI more capabilities for us to all work with in the future. So then specifically with types of AI, we've all been using AI for many years, but what often we have been using is what's called more of like a narrow AI, which is designed for a specific task. This could be speech recognition, it could be facial recognition. When we look at our iPhone and it opens, that's a type of artificial intelligence. When we use a map that gives us real-time directions, tells us things to avoid because of road construction or updates the length of time it's going to take to get somewhere. That is a form of artificial intelligence. Even something like a Roomba vacuum that learns the layout of your house to vacuum around large objects. that is a form of artificial intelligence. I think the one that maybe is most commonly associated with text that we all use a lot of is like the predictive text in emails. So you could be typing along and the email that you're writing, the program will suggest the next 4 words in the sentence, and you can just tab and accept that, or not accept it if that's not what you want to say. But that is also a form of artificial intelligence, just at a more narrow level. What has grown is this more general AI, strong AI, generative AI that is designed to perform any intellectual task that a human can do. So ones that you've likely heard of: ChatGPT, Gemini, which used to be Bard from Google, Claude from Anthropic, Copilot from Microsoft is also another one. And those are all more kind of the traditional text-based, but there's also things like Stable Diffusion and Midjourney that will create images. Canva recently, included a tool within their platform that you can type in words and it will generate images. So those are all things that are more in this generative AI category. And then the third type of AI is super AI, which would surpass the human intelligence in all areas. This does not yet exist, but if you're thinking about examples of this, we can look to movies. So Jarvis from Iron Man or Vicky from iRobot would be good examples of that super AI that may never exist, but potentially someday. So let's look at how generative AI works. So first, it is built on a large language model. And what this is a lot of training data, often text and images and videos that are found on the web, kind of scraped from the web, and put into a model that the generative AI is trained on. And if you use different generative AI tools, Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, you're going to see that the outputs are slightly different. And the reason for that is because they have been trained on different data. And so while the answers and the responses may be similar, there are going to be differences based on the training data. And you can also see that some of the voices that the generative AI tools have will sound either more academic or more conversational. And again, that is going to be because of the training data that is inputted. Then the other way that generative AI works is that it's predictive, in the sense that it is generating text or images or videos based on predictions, what it thinks the next word should be based on the data that it has been trained on. So what is the most commonly used next word when you're putting these ideas together? We often already see the very basic of this in that predictive text and email. So that idea, it's just think about it in a much larger scale. And so when we're thinking about predictions and how generative AI is predictive, it isn't creating new content in the way that we would necessarily think about a human or even a machine creating new content. It is really just looking at previously written content and then predicting what should be the response to your question or prompt. Then generative AI also uses what are called neural networks. So just this morning, I asked ChatGPT to define a neural network for me. And here's what it said. It said, neural networks are a class of machine learning models inspired by the structure and function of the human brain. They consist of interconnected layers of nodes or neurons, which process data by applying weight and activation functions to inputs, learning patterns from data to make decisions or predictions. Then there are specific components of neural networks. And again, this comes from ChatGPT just this morning. But the first component of a neural network is the neurons or nodes. And these are basic units of a neural network that receive input, process it, and pass it the output to the next layer. Each neuron applies a mathematical function to its inputs, typically involving a weighted sum and an activation function. The next component is the layer, and there's 3 layers. So the first layer is the input layer, and that receives the raw input data. Then there is the hidden layer, which is that intermediate layer where computation happens. And this can be one or many hidden layers in a network. And then there's an output layer, where the final layer that produces the output of the network. So which is going to be the result that you see. But that input layer where you're asking a prompt and it's getting the data, the hidden layer is it's computing what is going to give you as an output, and then the output is what you actually see. The next component is the weights. And then this is where parameters are adjusted during the training process to minimize the error in predictions, and weights determine the strength and direction of the influence of input signals. So in other words, the weights are how information and how word choice and responses are weighted in response to a prompt. So as the neural networks are being trained, the individuals creating the neural network weight the responses. Yes, we want this. No, we don't want this. And those weights can be adjusted, but somebody made those decisions. The fourth component is bias, and these are additional parameters in each neuron that allow the model to fit the data better by shifting the activation function. So again, software engineers look at what the output is and during the kind of training process and determine, okay, are there additional things that we want weighted higher than something else? Do we prefer one thing over something else in the output? And then finally, the last component is the activation function, and the functions that introduce non-linearity in the model, enabling it to learn complex patterns. And so this is an important piece of it in the sense that it's what gives the system ability to learn complex things. So those are the 5 components of neural networks. If you're curious and want to go deeper on this, there's a lot of really good YouTube videos that explain how neural networks work, and I would encourage you to explore those on your own. And then lastly, how generative AI works is with machine learning. And so there are kind of 2 pieces of machine learning that, in addition to neural networks and the training data, is that the machine is constantly learning based on the prompts we ask, but there can be exceptions to that. And those exceptions are when you have the ability to tell the system not to include your data in the training set for the large language model moving forward. And this is what I expect to see more happening, especially as more companies and organizations want to use generative AI in their work. We can, like, for example, in a hospital setting or a healthcare setting, HIPAA is going to apply. And medical professionals cannot just input data into generative AI because it would not be HIPAA compliant. But there can be ways to get kind of a siloed generative AI tool, large language model, that is not connected to the other large language models, where healthcare professionals could put data in to help with a treatment plan or a diagnosis, but that would meet the requirements of federal law. Then the other piece is that machine learning can feed back into itself, but sometimes there's that caveat where it learns kind of over and over again, but there can also sometimes be a confirmation bias that occurs when it is constantly feeding back into itself. So some companies will turn that off, so it doesn't just keep kind of generating the same thing over and over again, but continues to expand and as new content is added to it. So now that we've looked at what generative AI is and how it works, let's think about how to use it in our own work. So probably right away, how everybody's talking about it is productivity. And I really think it's important just to kind of invite, in a sense, AI into your work to see what it can do. What that means is, do you need to brainstorm something? Can it help you write an email? Do you need to create social media posts? That's something that I found it to be useful for. It can summarize documents for you. It can, help you write policies. And I'm not saying have it just write your policy, but suggest, you write in there, give me 3 policy examples for this topic. And then you can look at the 3 examples, and that can all be from one generative AI, or you can try different ones and see what each one gives you. And then you can, tweak and use and edit as you see fit, but it can give you a place to start. It can help you create a logo. I've used it for that. If I needed some images, instead of going online and looking for Creative Commons images, I have started using generative AI to create very specific images. And I still, cite that this was created by generative AI, but I found that it can be very helpful in getting the exact type of image that I'm looking for, either on a presentation, a logo for a conference, something like that. So those are just some examples of how you can kind of invite it into your work, things you might already be doing day to day, and just help it give you ideas. It's also important to learn how to write prompts. When you're writing prompts, you need to be specific. Add context to your prompt. What I mean by that is that you could say, this is this policy needs to be for a special library. And then you can say what type of special library, a transportation library, a health, and health sciences library, something like that. Add context. You could say who the specific audience is. It's healthcare professionals. It is lawyers. Those are the types of things where you could add context. Tell the generative AI how you want the output to be presented. Say that you want it in an outline form. Say you want it in 3 paragraphs. Say that you want it in, bullet points. However you think the information is going to be best used, tell it to do that. You can also build on previous prompts. So maybe you didn't like the result, so you say, okay, do that again, but with 4 bullets, or change it to talk about virtual reality instead of extended reality. I mean, you could just change the words and build on the previous prompts. You can tell AI what mistakes it made. Like, no, that piece wasn't right. Can you find a new source, or can you find something that sounds more professional? You can tweak it that way. And if you're really stuck on how to write a prompt for something, you can always ask the generative AI tool to create a prompt for you. You can say, I'm not sure how to write a prompt to get an example logo for this conference. What would you suggest? And you can do that, and it will give you some example prompts, and you can ask for multiple examples. But those are some things about how you can use it in your work. So let's specifically talk about presentations. So earlier this year, I asked ChatGPT how I can use generative AI to develop a presentation. And it said that I can use some specific prompts to guide that development, that I can create, a title and introduction. I had to have it specifically ask, write a title slide for a presentation on a specific topic, write an introduction slide outlining the main points to be covered in a presentation. I could ask it to develop slides on the history and background of a particular topic, create slides detailing the current state and trends in a particular topic, outlining key challenges and opportunities. I could ask it to include slides with real-world examples and case studies, create a slide with data and statistics, add a slide that explains a particular concept, suggest visual elements and graphics to include on the slides, design a chart or graph to illustrate something, create an infographic summarizing the main benefits of a topic. Then I could ask it to develop a conclusion slide summarizing the key takeaways from the presentation. And you could always upload your presentation and then have it look at that and give you ideas for a conclusion slide. You can prepare a slide with potential questions and answers for the Q&A session. So there's lots of different ways that you could approach this, for different parts of a presentation. And you wouldn't have to do everything, but if you're stuck on one particular aspect, you could get ideas by using the different tools and the different ways of approaching your presentation and the different generative AI tools that are available. So AI also can assist with a lot of writing. This is a lot of the initial conversation around generative AI had to do with writing and how there was quite a bit of understandable concern about how it was changing, how we write, especially when we're thinking about a higher ed perspective, how we were going to know if our students that work was really representative, because if you've seen a lot for a while, companies were coming out with AI checkers, but research has proven that they do not work. It'll pretty much say anything was written by artificial intelligence. And so you cannot rely on those to give you an accurate summary or accurate finding of if the work was created with generative AI or if it was written by a human. So, but if we're still thinking about writing, there are some ways that it can be used to assist us, just like we might work with an editor. If we were writing a book, we'd work with an editor. I know when I wrote my dissertation, I worked with an editor, and the editor was able to give me some really helpful tools, with grammar and syntax, and helped, with the commas, and just really kind of helped shape what I was trying to say in a better way. Generative AI can do those same things. So, but with writing specifically, it can help with idea generation. You can use it for brainstorming, helping you outline something. It can help you with research. Some of those initial conversations around research were that generative AI would hallucinate and it would make up content that didn't actually exist. So if you were looking for articles on a particular topic, it would make them up. Occasionally, it would give you real sources. But if you remember about how generative AI predicts, it would just predict what it thought would sound like a legitimate or a real title, not actually give you real titles. It has gotten better about that, especially because early versions of ChatGPT were not connected to the internet, and some of the free versions still aren't. But if you're using one that's connected to the internet and is current, it's doing a lot better at finding real sources and not making them up. Always, of course, still good to check and double check that what you're looking at, if you're asking it to help you find sources, is actually out there. Get those DOIs, use them, but it's a lot better than it was. It will help you, and additionally with writing, grammar and syntax. I was just talking about that. It can help you write citations. It can help you adjust your tone for an intended audience. You could say, I really need this to sound more academic. I need this to sound more technical. This is marketing content. This is, business writing. And so there are ways that you can, and it will help you with the tone of your work and the voice in which you're speaking. So just as you're thinking about using generative AI in your own work, whether in the different capacities in which you're writing, these are some ways that it can be used appropriately. We are going to talk a little bit in an upcoming slide about citations and copyright and authorship. So hold that thought for now, and we'll come back to that. So another way that we can use generative AI in libraries is with outreach. And so I asked Claude, this time instead of ChatGPT, what are some ways that I can use generative AI in library outreach? And it gave me some responses. It said it can help with content creation, drafting promotional materials like flyers, brochures. It can write scripts for video promotions or podcasts. It can develop content for the website, social media channels. It can create presentation materials for outreach events. It can help with marketing and promotion for like creative campaign ideas, drafting email marketing. It can also help with researching effective promotional strategies used by other libraries. It could also look at program development, generating ideas for innovative library programs, help it to plan and schedule events, draft program descriptions, develop supporting materials, can also assist with grant proposals and writing, and it can also look at data analysis. If you have data, you can ask it to pick out what are the themes that you see. It can do some statistics for you with some data. So those are all things to think about and how you can use it for outreach in your own library. One thing I'll caution with data analysis, though, is that it certainly does a good job if you want it to do that and can ethically use it in that way. I've tried it with just some fake data that I created just to kind of see what it could do. But again, when we're thinking about data, we just need to make sure that we are protecting the data in the way that we said we would protect the data, that we're not giving personal information about there, that anything we would upload into these systems would be de-identified, and just being cautious about uploading anything that would be potential personal information. We would definitely not want to do that. So then let's look at policy considerations, because I think a lot of organizations are thinking about, okay, when is it appropriate to use AI in this organization? And I think there's going to be different answers to this question, depending on what fields you work in, who you're supporting, who your library is supporting. Because I mentioned HIPAA earlier, but in education settings, FERPA is going to apply, and we would need to make sure that we're aware of that. The libraries that work with minors are going to have other laws that apply, COPA, and so we're just going to have to make sure that all those are considerations, and then what's appropriate within those parameters. So what I often recommend when we're thinking about policy considerations for AI, with also the realization that these tools are changing rapidly and they're just getting better and better, and they're just being able to do more and more. So you don't want to have to change your policy all the time. So I tend to think it's best to have an overarching policy, such as members of this organization will use AI in ethical ways. Then those ethical ways can be defined by a particular area of the library, or they can be, fleshed out in more detail. And those things can be changed as new changes are made or new laws, or the overarching organization makes changes. But it often, when creating an AI library policy, you often want to outline the guidelines for ethical and responsible use. And so I did ask ChatGPT what would be an example AI library policy? What were the things that I would need to include? And it just kind of gave me this template. And it said, think about the purpose, think about the scope, the ethical principles, such as transparency, privacy, fairness, accountability. Think about, user consent, especially if you're going to be using you're uploading any type of information, um, data management, bias and fairness, accessibility, and then training support, continuous improvement, compliance, and then review and update the policy over time, so we would with any other policy. So those are the 11 things that it suggested. I still tend to think that a overarching policy that kind of gets at making sure that we're using it in ethical ways and then defining those ethical ways is going to be the most helpful in the long run. So then copyright. I mentioned that we're going to kind of get back to authorship and copyright and everything. So that is this slide. In early 2023, the Copyright Office launched an initiative to examine the copyright law and policy issues that were raised by the rapid growth of AI. And after many conversations, the office published a notice of inquiry, and it received over 10,000 comments. So again, a lot of comments were made about this. And in 2024, earlier this year, the office published a notice, and it said that there's copyright registration guidance. So if you haven't read that, it's called Copyright Registration Guidance, Works Containing Material Generated by Artificial Intelligence. And what it specifically said was that copyright can only protect material that is the product of human creativity. And the policy does not mean that technological tools cannot be part of the creative process. And applicants that are applying for copyright have the duty to disclose the inclusion of AI-generated content in a work submitted for registration and to provide a brief explanation of the human author's contributions to the work. So that is, if you're thinking about the issues with copyright, that is thinking about the content generated by generative AI or LLM, large language model. And that is kind of one of the key pieces when we're talking about generative AI, that only work created by humans can be copyrighted. And then, but when you're looking at like publishers, if you're looking at journals, journal publishers, publishers of books, they build on the Copyright Office's determination about authorship. So authorship can only be given to work created by humans. They can be the only authors. But many publishers have started creating policies that say, just like the Copyright Office is asking, that authors must disclose the inclusion of any AI-generated content and how they used it, even if it is to help with grammar and syntax. That must be disclosed. So, for example, APA, the American Psychological Association, its current policies on generative AI are: when a generative AI model is used in the drafting of a manuscript for an APA publication, the use of AI must be disclosed in the methods section and cited. AI cannot be named as an author. And when AI is cited in an AI scholarly publication, the author must employ the software citation template, which includes specifying in the methods section how, when, and to what extent AI was used. Authors in APA publications are required to upload the full output of API as supplemental material. So not all journal publishers have that extensive of a requirement. Many of the journals that I have been writing in lately want that disclosure, but have not asked to upload the full output of AI as supplemental material. That might change, though, over time. So I think this is just something we should all keep an eye on as we're working with our own publishers, if we're working with patrons, library users who are getting content from publishers. So that's again the content generated by large language models. But the other side of the copyright issue is content used in the training of these large language models. And there has been a lot of discussion about how the content that was used to train generative AI, much of it was under copyright, and it was taken from the web, and proper payment or proper use was not given to the authors of this work. And there have been lawsuits filed over this. A high-profile issue recently was with Scarlett Johansson saying that she did not give permission for her voice to be used in a generative AI and one that would speak, but a model came out that sounded very much like her. So that was probably something that you saw in the news. And so there's a lot of concern around content used. Some have argued that it is available on the web, that it's like Creative Commons. Others, though, have disagree with that argument. It is interesting if you use many of the image generators and you ask, for a picture of, a superhero to come up. Many of the superhero images, the images it will create, look like images from Marvel movies. And the only way that it would do that is if that's what it was trained on. And so it's very interesting there's a whole article in the New York Times about looking at the images that these image creators generated with what was inputted and how it would know what that was. Fascinating. So I encourage you to explore this a little bit more if this is something that is coming up at your organizations. But a few things to be cautious about. Generative AI has so much potential and to help with a lot of things that we do, but there are certainly things to be cautious about. One is bias. And this can be everything from, if you ask for an image of, someone who works in a particular field, and then the image back gives you a male or a female, just, based on kind of historical trends and stereotypes. That bias is going to be embedded. So just thinking about what images, what stereotypes it could potentially be reinforcing, that's something to really be cautious about. Also, just, use of particular pronouns in the text that it gives, if there's bias there, again, reinforcing gender stereotypes, things like that. Issues with privacy. This is really important. I already talked a little bit about that with data analysis and how we want to make sure that we are cautious about what we're uploading so that personal identifiable information isn't, we're not uploading that so that it's not getting into the system. Because then it could potentially come out in a response to somebody else if it's learning on itself. But just be aware of that. Think about just other ethical issues that might come up that are unique to your organization and the type of users that you support in your libraries. But then also think about what is included and what is not included. This can be something that is impossible to know because we don't know all of the information that it was trained on. But if you're asking questions about a particular topic, it might have a lot more information on one area of the world and not nearly as much information on another area of the world. We can see this a little bit more clearly when we're looking for particular language content. So, if there are certainly content created in Russian that's included in there, Spanish. You can see some of the kind of widely used languages included. But then when we get down to some of the languages that are used by spoken by a smaller population, you're not going to see as much content included, and the systems might not be able to generate content in those languages. So that's just something to be aware of as you're working with these tools as well. There's also the black box problem, which is basically the inability to see how generative AI develops responses. And so this is just really a lack of transparency. It's like once the systems and the generative AI start going, it's really impossible to go backwards and see how they came to the response that they gave you. So you can't recreate those steps. And that can just be a bit concerning, especially as generative AI starts giving suggestions for anything really. That black box problem is something to be cautious about because you don't know what data it's pulling from to give you that response. And then the digital divide. Individuals who have the ability and the resources to learn how to use generative AI to add it into their work are potentially going to have opportunities that other individuals are not going to have. So the digital divide could potentially be widened with if we're not all given the same opportunities to learn how to use AI. The cost of AI subscriptions is going to potentially lead to a bigger, AI divide because you have to get the best and the newest. You have to pay a monthly subscription to get to the newest version of ChatGPT or Claude. There are ways that they say that they're like ChatGPT is coming out with a new version that they say eventually is going to be available to everyone, but we're not there yet. And then also secret prompts. And so this is the idea that you can tell the system not to include your prompt into the training data, but you often have to either pay the subscription fee to do that, or with an image generator like Midjourney, you can actually pay just to keep your prompt secret so that nobody else can create the exact same image that you did. And so there's going to be this financial divides that are going to be created there with generative AI tools. And then I want to wrap up by looking at what the future might hold. I expect there to be expansive growth of AI. I think that this is it's just going to continue to grow. I just finished reading Co-Intelligence by Ethan Mollick, and he specifically said, always think about the AI tool that you're using as the worst AI tool you will ever use, meaning that it's just only going to get better day after day after day. And so what I'm using today is going to be worse than what I'm using tomorrow. I also expect that AI to be integrated into really kind of all the tools that we use online. So I mentioned Canva earlier, that AI is now integrated into that. Google is integrating Gemini into Workplace and getting it into Google Docs and email, and we can start using it in that way. Copilot is getting into Microsoft products. And so I think it's just going to become another feature that is integrated into much of what we're already doing. I think it's also going to lead to different types of work. I'm not somebody who thinks that work is going to cease to exist, but I think we are all going to have to become, better editors of what generative AI kind of outputs. We're going to have to make more decisions about what information that we're given. So which is going to lead to the importance of content knowledge. So there is at the University of Virginia, there's a cognitive psychologist named Daniel Willingham, and he's written a lot about critical thinking over the years. And it said, thinking is always about something. And so in the ability to think, we have to have content knowledge to do that. And so to be able to determine what we want to use from generative AI, we're going to need some background knowledge on the topics that we're working with to be able to make determinations about what the best output from generative AI is. And so I think, being well read, learning content, learning facts, all that is going to be more important moving forward, because of these systems being able to be creative and help us brainstorm and work with content in new ways. So I just want to thank you all for being here, listening. I hope this gave you some things to think about, some things to take back to your library that you can either open up conversations with others at your library about generative AI, help you think about the next steps you want to take using generative AI in your libraries. And then, yes, just I hope that this has been helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren, for the wonderful presentation. And if you have any questions about any of our software or our company, our contact details are listed on the screen. And please stay tuned for more webinars and content from Lucidea. And on behalf of the Lucidea team, I thank you all for attending today. And until next time, thank you.